Hello, in this video we will cover security, which is located under the My Account menu under the My Profile. Security is where you will set up your users and govern what access they have in the system. You'll see several different tabs over here to the left: Users, System Class, Entity Class, and Report Class, and each one of these governs different things. The first setup function that you would want to do is System Class and Entity Class, because each user has to be assigned a system and entity class. So if you don't have those created yet, then you would not be able to save the user. So let's start with the System Class. This is where you have the ability to determine what users you can see within the system and what functionality they can do within the system. Administrators have global access, meaning they can see everything in the system and make any changes they need to without having to contact AMT Direct. Now, you will notice over here under the existing system classes that you don't see global as an option. That's because it's sort of a behind-the-scenes access. Therefore, you can't make changes to the global access, but you can assign users to it. Okay? Now you'll notice I have 3 different system classes here. The goal here is to think about how the different types of users you're going to have in your system. Maybe you have those who are only running reports, or lease abstractors, or your accounting team. You'll want to figure out and decide what their responsibilities will be in the system, what screens they will need to access to, what functions they will need to perform, etc. Then you would want to create a system class to govern those users. So you might have a separate system class for your accounting team and one for the users who are running reports and your lease abstractors, because they are going to require different access in the system. For example, lease abstractors don't need access to the AP manager to create payment batches, so you can govern this on a group-by-group basis if you wanted to. Now, within the existing system classes tab, you have the label here. So this is a equipment training class versus a training system class and training manager system class. Again, this is just how I have these laid out in my training database. Okay, so if you see at the top here, it's giving you some information on who created it and when, and if it's been modified, and who it was modified by, and when they modified. So if there are ever questions about those being modified, you can always reference that information here. Let's take a look now at adding a new system class. First, make sure you're on the System Class tab, and then click the Add New button here. You'll receive a pop-up that is asking you to enter the system class name, which again is how you're going to want it to be identified over here in the existing System Classes tab. For example, I'm going to enter AMT Training, and then click the Save button. The screen will refresh, and it will now be listed over here in the existing System Classes tab. Now you have a blank slate over here to the right, and you can start assigning out those responsibilities and accesses. So let's say you named your new system class as accounting, for example, for your accounting team. Then you would want to come over here and assign the areas that you want them to have access to. Now once you are ready to start assigning permissions, I recommend selecting the global box here, which will go ahead and select all the boxes below and everything listed within them. So once you select global access, you can come over here for the Set All To, Read, Add, Edit, or Full. What this means is, if you set it to read, then users can only read and view information only. If you set it to Add, Edit, the users can view the data as well as make changes to it or add new information. Full access means the user can view the data, edit or add new, but can also delete data within the system. Okay? I would recommend selecting Full here. Select that radio button. And then you can set them field by field below. So now everything is set to global and full permissions, so we can start expanding these and looking at our different options. Now under the global access, you have all of your different sections here. So Portfolio Insight, Accounting, Facilities, Projects, Reports, My Account, and Maps. Okay? So each one of these represents a different module within the system. These also match many of the menu options you see up here at the top. Okay? In Portfolio Insight, you'll find your leases and properties. In accounting, you'll find AP and AR. In reports, you'll find Report Builder. My Account is strictly administration functionality. So again, you'll see those different things by clicking the expand arrows underneath them. Okay. For example, if you click the expand arrow under Portfolio Insight, you're going to see your Activities Manager, Contacts, Customization Suite, Document Manager, Global Search, Lease List, Leases, Properties, Regions, Suite. Okay. You'll see some of these things are located in the PI menu as well, such as Contacts, Document Search, Global Search, the Lease List. Okay. So now, I also want to show you, if you expand the arrow beside the leases, you're going to see your equipment and your real estate. So maybe someone only needs access to the equipment leases and they don't need to see real estate. So you could come in and uncheck the box here, or vice versa, if they only needed real estate and not equipment, you could uncheck the equipment. Okay. Again, these can be further expanded. So if we click the drop down beside the real estate, you'll see your additional info, late fees, lease contacts, lease issues, non-financial clauses, options, recurring charges, security deposit, sublease, suite index, and space management. These are pertaining to the lease. The different widgets you have on the lease summary is where this information is pertaining to. Again, think about how the system is laid out and how security is laid out in the same manner. Now, I do want to point out this expand button down here at the bottom. If you click it, it will expand all of the arrows up above. Then you can come in field by field and determine what access to give. It is a field by field basis, so you don't have to set everything under leases to add edit. You can make some fields full and others add edit. Now let's say that you unchecked Portfolio Insight. So we go up here and uncheck the box, and then click Save, then assign this system class to a user. Then whenever that user comes in, they won't even see the Portfolio Insight functionality on their menu bar here because they don't have access to it. They would only see accounting, reports, my account, and help. They wouldn't see any of the options that they would not have under PI. No access to global search, user events, or etc. So none of these in this list here. Okay, all of that would be restricted because the PI box again was unchecked here. Okay, so not only do you have the read, add, edit, or full access, you also have the option to uncheck and give no access whatsoever. So now I'm going to expand the accounting. Okay, so under the accounting, this is where you'll find your AP and AR, your accounting setup, CPI, FASB 13, FASB IASB, your general ledger, OPEX, percent rent enhanced, etc. Okay, so if we actually expand the arrow beside the AP manager, you'll notice this is where you have the ability to give access to adding invoices, batch export, check import, payment batch creation. So let's say you have a user that just needs to add invoices, but you don't want them to be able to create payment batches. Then you could uncheck the payment batch creation and batch export and check import. So then they would only be able to add invoices, and that's it. Again, this is an example of how you might want to manage permissions and determine what your user roles should be within the system. Now, I do want to point out that under the Portfolio Insight, scroll back up here, so Portfolio Insight, under the Customization Suite, okay, you have custom labels, groupings, and maintain codes. These three are typically administrative functionality because they affect the system globally. Custom labels, again, are what you saw in Master Fields Management. If a user changes one, it is system-wide. Therefore, if you don't want your users to have access to those, then you can deselect them here. I just wanted to point those out because they are not located under the My Account section where most of the administrative functionality is. So now we're going to take a look at the Entity Class tab. Entity Class is where you can govern who has access to which properties and leases in the system. You can specify that a user only see a specific group of properties and not all of them. It's based off of your property group 1, which is located at the property level. But to show you what I'm talking about, if we go over to Portfolio Insight, Data Customization, and then Groupings Management. So if I click on property group 1 here, you'll see that my structure is defined out as mall, medical, office tower, or shopping center. So again, that's located at your property level. So if we go back to our entity class tab, you'll see that same structure here. So you can come into entity class and say you only want user A to see equipment leases or user B to only see real estate leases. You can govern that here on a property by property or lease by lease basis. You can create as many of the entity classes as you need. For example, maybe you have a Canadian entity class for your Canada users because they only need to see properties or leases in Canada, or maybe you create a North, East, South, and West for the US. If you click Add New, you'll receive a pop-up asking you to enter the entity class name. So I'm just going to enter AMT Training and then click Save. The screen will refresh and it will be displayed on the left-hand side under the existing Entity Classes tab. Okay, so there it is, AMT Training. So now you can start selecting which properties or leases you want to give access to for this entity class. Again, this is based on that property group 1 that I mentioned earlier. You do have your expand arrows here, okay, so that you can break them down accordingly. So let's say we expand the first one, which is mall. You're going to see all of the properties under that. Okay. Now you can go in and check one by one which of these you want to give access to, or you can check the box beside mall to give access to all of them, but maybe you just want them to see all of them except for your 101 training locations. You could uncheck that and just keep going until you've made your selections. Okay. Now if you click the expand arrow at the property, so here, it will show you the list of leases that are at that property. Okay. If you deselect the location, by association, you're not going to see the leases, meaning, so let's say they're all checked and we uncheck it. If we were to save this, then the user would not be able to see any of these leases or this location. Okay. So you also have the ability to get as granular as you need when it comes to determining what you want your users to see or not see. Okay, so now if you notice over here, I did this under the global setting here to the right, but if you switch it to detail, it will not only allow you to determine properties and leases, but it will also let you decide what spaces and documents to see as well. So now if we were to click the expand arrow beside the medical grouping here, not only are you going to see your properties and your leases, you're also going to see property documents, your suite information, as well as more lease information, lease documents. So again, you can get really granular as to what you want the user to see. For example, you may want them to be able to see the lease, but not be able to view the documents. If that were the case, you would make sure that the lease was checked, but then the property documents were unchecked, or lease documents, whichever you did not want them to see. If you want them to have access to everything, then you can check mark the box here and it will check everything. Okay. So now I'm going to click on the report class tab. This is really for crystal reporting that AMT Direct is in the process of moving away from, and we'll use Report Builder instead. It's an older type of reporting, therefore you don't need to do any setup on the report class tab. Okay. And now lastly, we have the users tab. This is where you will add your users to the system. So on the left hand side here, this is all of the existing users that you have in your database. So every user that you currently have, you'll see it over here in this column. You can scroll down, you'll see that I do have quite a few in this database. Okay. You'll notice if you click on a user, it will tell you when the user last accessed the system, that date and time, who created the user, whether the user was modified and who did so, and what date and time. Again, this lets you track those high-level details on a user-by-user basis. Okay. So let's say you need to add a new user. Your first step would be to click Add New. Okay. And then you will have a blank slate here on the right, and you can start entering your information. The first field is the username. Now, if you remember from the client profile, it has to be at least 5 characters. This could be the user's email address, first initial last name. It's up to you to decide. So I'm going to use my email address. Again, and this is actually very common. Clients will typically use email addresses or first initial last name. So then I'm going to enter my first and last name, and again my email address here. Now, the email address that you enter here, that will be the one that AMT sends the credentials to. The user will receive 2 emails, one with the username and client ID, and the second email will be a link to create a password. So then below the email, you can enter address information. It's not required, but you can enter it if you like. Okay? And then you have a company field. So let's say you have an auditor that needs to come in and look at some information. You can assign them a company so that you know this is an outside user and not one of your company users. You can use this company list button here, which is a list of all the companies you have added currently within the AMT system. Okay. Then you have the user classes section. This is where you're selecting the entity and system classes that you created. If you click the drop down, you can make your selections. Now you will see global here. If you recall, I previously mentioned that global is behind the scenes in AMT, but this is just where you're able to assign that global access. So I'm going to select AMT training for both. Okay. The report class can be left blank if you like, or you can select global. It's not required because eventually it will be obsolete. Now down at the bottom you have some additional information. The first field is admin user. It's a yes or a no. If you select yes here, it's not automatically giving the user administrative powers over the system. It's just tracking whether or not they are an admin in the system. Okay. You can enter a user expiration date. So if you enter a date here, then when that date comes, the user would no longer be able to log into the system. Another scenario might be if you had a user who suddenly quit and you no longer want them to have access, you could enter a date which will prevent them from logging in. Now you do have the ability to delete users. However, we recommend unchecking the active box, which would be located here once the record is saved. Okay? You would enter an expiration date and then uncheck the box. This way you don't lose a user record in the system where that user may have created reports or payment batches, etc. Lastly, you have a notes section. So if you need to add a note as to why you added this user or gave certain access, then you can enter that information here. So once you have everything set, you would click Save down here in the bottom. You'll receive a message at the top telling you the user was added successfully, and then the user will be added over here to the existing users. Okay. So now if I click on a particular user, I'm just going to go ahead and cancel that. Okay. I'll show you that active checkbox. So again, it's just located right here across from the user expiration date field. So again, the active box here, if you uncheck it, it will make the user inactive. Now if you delete a user and then needed to add them back, you would have to use a different username. So again, we recommend using the active box instead. Now if we scroll back up, we can take a look at the reset password hyperlink. So let's say the user has locked themselves out because of too many failed password attempts. Then you could come into that user's record and click the reset password hyperlink. It will send that user an email with a hyperlink to reset their password. So this brings us to an end on the My Account security. Please note that workflow administration is covered in a subsequent training and video. And again, if you need any further information or step-by-step guidance, you can reference the Knowledge Center, which is located under the Help tab, and you can search for the Security Help Guide.